stalking, a whole variety of criminal and civil type cases. So I'm a consultant, and as Dr. Thorpe mentioned, I also have a separate organization that creates, maintains virtual machines for basically university environments. So we set those up for students. It was a great idea prior to the pandemic. It was even a better idea during the pandemic. But even without the pandemic, having the students have basically the virtual machines worked out really well in terms of not having to deal with individual students, machines that may not have been equipped appropriately and so forth. So wear several different hats. And I probably should add the fact that I'm also the founder director of the Association for Digital Forensic Security and Law. We do an annual conference, although we did not do one last year or this year because it's face-to-face. We didn't want to go basically virtual, but we do, we're in our 16th year now, I think, for our Journal of Digital Forensic Security and Law, which is double blind reviewed. And that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much for that, Glenn. And as I move around the table, as you can see, we have some true cybersecurity around the table as well this evening. So Lieutenant Sterling, sir, your input at this time. Just a quick introduction.
Good afternoon, Sean. Afternoon, panel, colleagues. I am Lieutenant Colonel Godfrey Sterling, the head of the Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team. At this point, we represent 1/3 of the GOJ's effort to improve cyber hygiene, protect its internet-facing resources. The other two components being the CFCD from the JCF and the MOCA. We really... Say again?
No, continue.
Right, we really represent the one-stop shop for all things cyber coming out of the 2015 National Cybersecurity Strategy. And at this point, what we're really about is increasing that cyber hygiene through public education and awareness and the development of the 2021 Cybersecurity Strategy.
Sean, is your mic supposed to be on?
Sorry about that. Yes, my mic is supposed to be on. Yeah, so Right, so a pleasant good afternoon. I look like I was muted for a moment. So a pleasant good afternoon again to everyone. Thank you for coming. I am Sean Thorpe, the head of School of Computing here at the University of Technology, Jamaica, and I am your host for this particular podcast. There are some members who did not get a chance to introduce. They may have stepped away, but in due course of the conversation, they will have a chance to do so. I'm going to ask the person who is temp in this particular session if they could please declare themselves for me. Who is temp? Just please declare yourself for me as a courtesy. Person is gone. All right. All right. I want to make sure I have everybody on point. So this is an area that in the university, it is 101. We teach over 200 students on average in a core course in computer security. We have a full degree track in cybersecurity as one of our specialization tracks. I sincerely hope what we have been seeing in the last couple of weeks and in the last week where data breaches are concerned, we in the Caribbean here are ready, or we should be able to avoid any such concerns that may present themselves. The viewpoint is that if the United States sneezes, we catch a cold in this Caribbean region. I don't know if any of my colleagues here will dispute what I am saying, but it is some level of truth that you and I know. So we're going to take a conversational look at an important topic. Hey, let's start with the diagram. We are talking about breaches, but the argument is we'll ask the panel in a moment to define it properly. You have this bad actor, this guy who decides that he's going to bring down telecommunication services or utilities or banks. He operates from behind what is called an anonymous browser, called a Tor browser, you know, with VPN services which are no longer secure. And he figures out a way in which to compromise those local devices and steal whatever data, albeit financial or otherwise. We teach this in 101 classes. I put it to you that the concerns we are seeing in 2021 is probably nothing still more than these 101 breaches, where the bad actor has access to toolkits that are publicly available online that anonymizes them to get into anyone's network and compromise the environments real time. I'll go further to suggest that in today's time, in particular with the pandemic, all computer networks are hostile and they are subject to any type of discretionary attacks. We should consider all networks in the Caribbean zero trusted, as many other institutions worldwide have chosen to adopt. Zero trusted because the breaches are significant. Many companies are reactive rather than proactive to security, but I'm not here to preach that. I'm here to get some views about how we should engage this situation and how we move forward. The university is here to help with part of the response mechanisms. But let's start the conversation, and seeing that we have people in podcast land who will be listening to us and may have no clue at all about this area, I'm going to ask my very diligent panel just to share their perspective, lay or expert as it may be, on what really people are speaking about when they refer to a data breach versus a security incident. We had the Colonial Pipeline breach earlier this week with the crude oil. We had jam COVID-19 here in Jamaica in the last couple of weeks with the transport services in the airport. What really is a data breach and how different is it from a security incident? Let me ask Stephen, let me go with Stephen. Can you give us a view as a CaribNOG representative on what is the underlying views you have here about breaches versus security incidents, or is it the same?
To be honest, I mean, I kind of treat them as the same. There might be a more nuanced or a different view on it, but generally, I tend to treat both of them the same. They might have slightly different repercussions in terms of the visibility of it. I imagine that a breach itself might be something factual, like this actually happened, but it might not escalate into something that is more visible, that would have, you know, a larger incident response. But by and large, I kind of think of them as almost the same thing.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, let me move around here. So, Lieutenant Sterling, could you give me your viewpoint on a data breach versus a security incident? Just for the people in podcast land, if you have a perspective as the CERT. And thank you very much, Mr. Trevor Forrest, who just joined us. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Evening.
Good evening, sir. Yes. So, yeah, so go ahead, Lieutenant. Just acknowledging all our guests.
So, Sean, as Stephen said, the basis of both remains the same, which is the unauthorized access, really,
Yes.
of a computer system, and the data resident thereon are transmitting through that computer system. The difference that we at the CERT add is that the data breach really involves some sort of manipulation of the data, either in
Yes.
traffic or at rest, or an exfiltration of the data. Whereas the security incident may just represent a breach in your security perimeter, but not necessarily lateral movement within your network or manipulation or exfiltration of data.
Fair enough. So there's one view that, you know, the security incident could be, you know, an unexpected event that happens on a piece of hardware, or some interruptions with the software. But I take the point. Let's keep going around the table so far. Dr. Dardick, what's your view from Emory as it relates to this?
Data breach versus security incident. Data breach really, in my mind, is where somebody has gotten access to somebody's data, where security incident is really a larger, more encompassing group of incidents. Data breach would be an incident, but other security incidents would maybe include things like denial of service, distributed denial of service. Ransomware kind of fits into both categories of data breach as well as encryption. So I would say security incident tends to be a larger volume of types, as data breach really has to do with data itself. Data breach, I guess, you know, you can expand beyond that. Data breach, you know, obviously can include the, as I said, the ransomware, but data breach also has to do with, let's say, in the US, HIPAA violations and violations, not just stealing data wholesale, but violating various laws. So it's proprietary as well as legal aspects.
Excellent. So excellent point so far. So you're saying a security incident is a superset of which data breaches fall a part of it. Okay, point taken. So data breach is just one form of a security incident. So that's what I'm taking from the queue of points so far by the panel. At this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Trevor Forrest to weigh in, followed by Dr. Campbell accordingly, just to share his views.
Well, I mean, I agree with what has been said so far. I mean, the security incidents are really more like an all-encompassing umbrella description of you know, what could happen. A data breach is merely, as you say, a subset of that. So it is a category of security incident. So
is it intentional? Is it an intentional thing or unintentional thing, or it doesn't matter?
Well, so the thing about it is, when you say a breach, it could be, or maybe it's not. So it would have to be determined, in my view, whether it was intentional or unintentional. The fact that something occurred, where data may or may not have been lost, you have to determine if it was intentional or not, because there are situations where programs or software is written, and because of how it is written, information can be put out into space unintentionally, but when you look at the effect of it, it constitutes a data breach. It's not intentional. It wasn't the intention, but it's possible that data can get out, and that would constitute a breach. The intentional ones, well, we all know about those. So
yes, and when they declare themselves as intentional. So by definition, a security incident can just be any situation where you have an abrupt event like a hardware failure on a machine, but you may not have a breach, because the breach is suggesting, as Lieutenant Sterling indicated, that you could have movement of data or loss of data from the environment, for which the purposes may not necessarily even be known, and probably till weeks, months, even years later. So that's a valid set of points there. I would just want people in podcast land to understand the terminologies we're using. So, I mean, experts tend to use them quite freely. Ourselves, we use them freely, but just for the benefit of those who are listening generally, do not have any misunderstanding. So I take that point so far. I'm really opening the floor still. I know Dr. Campbell is really a co-host for me. This is not his biggest topic, but I do know he has views. And
I just want to add, though, Prof, that, and given recent incidents, there is a lot of confusion also when people speak of breaches versus vulnerabilities.
Yes.
That's two different things.
You want to highlight on that while they're at it? Just give the panel as well as the public a quick understanding of that distinction as a courtesy. Thank you for bringing it up.
Right. So you see, a breach, most people look at it, implies a particular incident or action. Now, it is a vulnerability that may cause a breach to occur. But the thing about it is, vulnerabilities happen all the time, whether it be because of the complexity of the software that is developed out there, and the
or simply forgetting to update, the Windows
well, it goes beyond just Windows, but it's just vulnerabilities are a matter of course. Humans make software. Humans are not perfect. And because we're talking about a high level of complexity both in code and in operating environments, then you're going to find that invariably vulnerabilities may be discovered. So vulnerabilities are normal. It is vulnerabilities, however, that are left untreated that could result in breaches. And that is something that needs to be understood, because many times people interchange breach with vulnerability, and they're not the same thing.
Yes, indeed. I think as a follow-up to this podcast, I'll probably just have a case presentation on that to attach to the podcast for the general persons in podcast land to appreciate. Very good point there, Mr. Trevor Forrest, who actually is a cybersecurity expert here in Jamaica. You know, he sits on many of the joint select committees. He wears many hats, being a former special advisor in government, etc., etc., etc. His introduction is huge. All right, so I appreciate those points, Sir Forrest, and thank you for that input. So, okay, in the context then of what we are saying, and I'm moving the conversation along, and professors can wait. Dr. Campbell, your mic is open. Yes, you can wait.
So good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
Right. I would just like to, to support the point of view given by Dr. Dardick, in that data breach tends to be, especially in the US and other countries like the EU, where some law is being broken. And Trevor did point out to the whole process of building software is a complex process. We are never perfect in what we do. And we build the best software based on our knowledge at the time. And we always are going to be working against persons who have other intentions to exploit vulnerability. So it behoves us to be responsible to fix those vulnerabilities that could result in either intended or unintended breaches. But breaches tend to be where laws are broken, such as data that should not be in the public domain gets into the public domain that could cause harm to individual concern.
Okay, so that's a good point there. So you are indicating that once you have a data breach, there's usually an alignment with a piece of legislation. Like, for example, what is topical globally now is the data protection legislation. You could have some element of that being violated as a constitute of the breach. I'm going to come back to that point later on in the conversation, because there are some very blurred issues where that is concerned as it relates to legislation and how we in fact tie them to breaches. But very good points so far. Very good points as it relates to just simply providing us with a definition. Ronald Brown, who is in the cybersecurity space here as well for his own company, but he's also one of our graduate students here at UTech. I don't know if you want to weigh in, Mr. Brown, at this point. Usually this is how this works. This is you ask for an invite, but it's an open panel discussion about very important topics. You care to weigh in, or are you observing?
I'll just observe for right. No, I'm still traveling. So
yeah, you're still traveling. Thank you very much, sir. All right, very good. All right. So in this context, the question that people in podcast land would like to appreciate, and we more so here in the Caribbean, is data breaches, are they really new? Are these new things? Is there a historical sense to how long we have been faced with data breaches, given the definition you just all provided? Is this new in the US? Is this new in the Caribbean? Is this new in Europe? Starting with anyone on the panel here to go ahead. Give us a view on the historical relevance of data breaches now that we're in 2021 and we are seeing that. Trevor, probably you could start, probably, probably give us a Caribbean perspective.
Well, I mean, data breaches are nothing new. They have been occurring for a very long time. I think though what we, and I mean, when I say a long time, I mean going back to the advent of computers, even before the internet, right? Yes. I think what has happened is over time things have evolved. The advent of the internet, data is being exchanged at a phenomenal rate. Data is being created at a phenomenal rate. And the value of data has skyrocketed.
Yes.
And as such, when you look at the statistics, or, I think, well, my last check on it was that the average breach costs a company in the region of $4 million.
Yes.
And you see that breach activity is nothing to scoff at from a dollar sign perspective. So now bear in mind, you know, when you start to look on it that way, I mean, in Jamaica, 2016, the statistic was over
100 million.
$100 million.
Yes, I remember that news post. Yes.
Right. In you know, cyber security based incidents, you know, it's big business, right? So
big business.
So what has happened is over time, because data has become more used, more important, more valuable, what you'll see over time now is a new realm of activity where you know, nefarious actors are now, you know, ramping up how they do things and ramping up the way in which they do things. Now, you know, long gone are the days when you have, you know, a couple of hackers sitting in a room plugging away themselves at systems. You know, they've gotten smarter now where they're using AI-based technology to carry out the very same things at scale. So what has happened is just that, you know, there's more data, so there's more activity now in that space. Yes. So I think, you know, it's nothing new, and I think it's something that we're gonna have to get used to, because you can't stop it. You can only mitigate as best you can.
Would you say that since the advent of the internet, more so we have seen more of this type of activity? I mean,
yeah, man, because absolutely. But I think over the past 10 years, it has escalated at a more exponential rate.
Yes.
So yeah, because more and more people are using technology, and as such, it creates an interesting situation where there are more targets now.
That's right.
Okay. And these targets all have very valuable information in their custody. Right. So, you know, you find that, you know, our friends out there don't really need to go to a bank and hatch a, you know, elaborate plan that could really be life-threatening. They sit at home, AC laptop, or in a internet cafe and do what they're doing.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to perpetrate these kinds of acts. But what is happening is the more people use the technology, is the greater the possibility of this kind of activity. And I think now with COVID, because COVID has now caused even greater use of technology.
Yes.
And
yes.
What you will find is an uptick in that kind of activity, threat activity, which
correct.
We've seen.
Correct. That's correct. We're seeing it. We're actually seeing it. Yes. Yes.
So that's really what I think has transpired, which is why we're seeing this uptick. But it has always been there. It has always been there.
Excellent point. And this sort of gets us started. So I really would like to thank Trevor for that elucidated pointers relating to the background on breaches generally. But let me go around the table. Stephen, what was the perspective of yourself, and then followed by Godfrey and then Glenn, in that order? You know, how have you been seeing breaches generally? Probably across the Caribbean region, historically.
So, well, don't have a lot of hard data on the Caribbean itself, but in terms of breaches, but can speak to similar along the line that that Trevor did, that the adoption itself of technology is a driver, even before internet, when it was just phone lines and modems and so on. There were versions of this in which people are trying to get into bulletin board systems or any system that is that require some kind of authentication for access to something valuable. I think as long as data exists or networks are connected, you have the possibility of theft, of breaches. But in more recent times, it would have been, as Trevor pointed out, more exponential simply because of more targets. You have more people on the networks, more people who are not as guarded as the original set of users, with a lot of people coming onto the internet or using devices because of social media and so on. You just have a much larger target base that has value, and sometimes the value is not even necessarily because of the direct some information that some specific person possesses, like when sometimes there's an incident carried out specifically to get into a target of value, that like what we saw with Microsoft and SolarWinds and so on, in which there was threat actors trying to get to something very specific. But then there's also the ability to steal data that has some secondary or other kinds of usage. So social media collects a lot of data about people. It knows how people are thinking, trending, so on. And so we saw with Cambridge Analytica, for example, a trove of data about people that were responding to things on Facebook that could get leveraged into shaping marketing and presentation of a message in a political arena and so on. Indeed. So the information itself, which tells you how a mass of people are going to respond, is really, really valuable. Even though that might not have been an issue of theft or so on, but what we're seeing there is just the value of connected bits of data. And so I think as long as we live in a context in which social media is used at the levels that it are, and people are interested in being connected, and people have to do a lot of things online, the risk of that being just a valuable source that can be leveraged is always out there. And so we could expect that to continue, a trend to continue for people to try to get their hands on that kind of data. It becomes up to either individual consumers or the institutions that can protect them, including governments, to try to help to manage that situation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So, Lieutenant Sterling, I mean, give me your take on the Jamaican perspective of this and the history of breaches as we have been having them here then, if I go in that order.
So, in following on what Trevor and Stephen have said, the instances of data breaches, they're not new. What is more in our face is the speed at which the breaches are published, the actual loss or the cost of these breaches, and the need for persons whose data, especially personally identifiable data, may be expected to demand that the holders, the data processors, account the why and the how of the breach, and to essentially give guarantees if there can be such for future use of the data. The challenge we face is that the pandemic has really forced everybody into that use of technology and digitization, where the company that used to be able to adequately defend its perimeter within a brick and mortar building now find the perimeter disappearing, and a single employee working remotely that creates a compromise and loses viable or authentic credentials now create not just a backdoor but an open door into the network. And so these breaches are now so prevalent, costly, and have such far-reaching implications that even here in Jamaica, people are starting to take stock and are demanding, look, it's not just a case of you telling us that there was a breach. We want to know how it happened, why it happened, and what assurances you can give as to what will happen in the future. And so it really represents a confluence of the functionalities, the opportunities, and the vulnerabilities created by the speed of the internet and the level of connectivity that exists today.
Well said, Lieutenant Stern. As a matter of fact, there's a viewpoint that historically the breaches in Jamaica and the Caribbean in particular has accelerated over the last 5 years. And the fintech sector in particular has been getting a bro beating in this regard as it relates to these elevated or escalated level of breach occurrences, not necessarily only in the Caribbean, but globally, because of the targets that you speak of from the bad actors. But food for thought, we're going to come back to that because there's a whole impact analysis around it. So from where you sit, Dr. Dardick, in the US, historically, how long have breaches been going on, sir, from where you sit there in the US, if you have a sense of that?
Long time. You know, it's interesting. One of the most common breaches today, the Sql Injection Attack.
Yes.
That's been over 20 years that that's been out there, and it's still out there. I think if we look at on your bullets here, the fourth bullet where you say, do we have the technical talent pool to deal with data breaches?
Yes.
And the answer that I would give on that is I would expand that. And I think that would explain why we've had these data breaches for so long. When we talk about dealing with data breaches, if you talk to a technical person, they're going to talk to you about after the fact, when in reality, we should be talking about before the fact. The best way to deal with data breaches is before the data breaches occur. And to expand upon that just a little bit further, when we say, do we have the technical talent pool? I'm going to say, do we have the management talent pool? The problem we have is we may have technical people that can deal with data breaches, prevent them, be able to mitigate them should they occur. But is management ready for that? Is management pushing that? With the recent breaches in the US, we're talking about infrastructure. Should companies be responsible for these breaches more so than they are? You know, is management taking on that responsibility? Are they, you know, part of that, you know, taking into account the risk? Are they personally responsible? I'll expand upon that one more time. You would talk about the weakest link in a company. We talk about, you know, networks. We talk about operating systems. And then we get to the individuals, the employees. And we talk about social engineering. The way I look at that is that if we have a chain, a link, and everybody's seen the chain, you know, we got one link that is network. We have another link that may be operating systems. And if you have 4,000 employees, you got 4,000 more links. I don't like to look at them as 1, 2, 3 links. I like to look at them as 1, 2, and then another 4,000 links for the individuals.
Yes. Yes.
Individuals, we're having them take courses, you know, on what they should be looking out for. They rip through those things, take the test, and now they've done what they need to do for a year. That really has to do with risk mitigation in terms of being sued by someone. Did the company do what they need to do? Yeah, the company did what they need to do. But did they really prevent these breaches from occurring? Is this really, you know, what we need to do to make employees take responsibility? I think in the same regard as employees should be, the same regard rather, as management, there needs to be some consequence. So basically what I'm saying on this fourth bullet is it's not just the technical talent, it's the management talent and the legal repercussions. And we need to deal with data breaches before they occur, not just after they occur.
So what I found very interesting is that when I asked the question, you started to chuckle, and I could interpret that, you know, colleagues, that, boy, what Glenn is saying, hey, listen, this thing has been around a long time, and I don't really know when it's going to be ending. I'm going to come back to that talent argument in due course, because, you know, there are some very pointed, you know, conversation that we can have around that. So historically, breaches in the US, you could say, is almost forever, if you want to use it in a very general and broad sense. And in 2021, it has not gone away. and we could argue that probably it might be still here to stay. Dr. Campbell, you have a,
yeah. Let me just add to that.
Yes.
You know, when we talk about how long, I joined IBM way back when,
Yes.
in the 70s.
Yes.
And one of the things that occurred shortly before then was the theft of Winchester Drive technology.
Oh wow, that's really
Somebody
early.
threw information in the trash on Winchester Drive technology. Somebody picked up on it, and the argument when IBM sued was that, well, it wasn't treated as important because it was in the trash and there wasn't anything. Well, it was labeled, I think, confidential, but so was the lunch menu. So, you know, data breaches are stealing information. This is what now, almost 50 years ago, right?
Exactly.
So what's really happened is when we say how long it's been around, we've just gotten more sophisticated.
Yes.
But back then, as well as today, it's a question is how do you make people responsible? How do you get them aware?
Responsible? Excellent. Excellent point so far. Dr. Campbell, you have any weighing on this? Or are you detouring to all the other presenters? But as we go around the table, yes.
Well, I'm detouring because, you know, I would say from the beginning of time, ever since data have some value, someone is always going to want to exploit a breach.
To exploit it, yes.
Yeah.
So Trevor made a key distinguishing point in his argument earlier, especially since the pandemic. The problem has become exacerbated with many of us having to revert online to do almost everything. The Caribbean way of doing things, which would see many unbanked having now to become banked. Many traditional manual processes now have to be automated and made available online. It is almost like a field day for bad actors and criminal actors to be using the space to now attack almost everything in sight and compromising business, personal, business to personal environments for which you actually use the technology. So this is really a big thing. But what I can say in the Caribbean in the last 5 years in particular, we have had a heightened rate of breaches relating to particularly the fintech sector. So this is something very useful to bear in mind. And for the public in podcast land listening to us, thank you for joining this afternoon. We are in the middle of a very important conversation here about cybersecurity breaches, especially since in the last week in the US alone, there was a huge data breach. I don't think we have qualified yet financially the cost of that breach. I don't think so, anyone. But the idea is that it has been a huge one. And we here in Jamaica had the Jam COVID-19 data breach earlier in the year. And we have seen over more than 2-3 decades ongoing, several other data breaches costing millions of dollars, not Jamaican or Caribbean dollars, US dollars and pounds, but significant in those jurisdictions. Yes.
So just to correct you there.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Prof.
Yes.
Jam COVID wasn't a breach. It was a vulnerability that was discovered.
So
it wasn't established whether data was exfiltrated or not, which would constitute a breach. Now, what was determined was that there was a vulnerability.
Yes.
Now, whether or not a breach occurred, I don't think that was fully established.
Okay, the investigations are still pending.
The assumption people make is that there was a breach, but you have to go and investigate and prove that.
That's correct. That's correct. All right. Very fair enough a point. A fair enough a point from our cyber expert panel. Fair enough. So the breach has to be established. It has to be justified, and we still await those outcomes. So good elucidating arguments in a very important conversation. So now this brings us to something significant. The impact of data breaches. I don't think I've even fully understand all of it myself yet at all levels, to the point that I always humble myself to the conversations of others to hear the views. Now, if we think about the social, economic, and political impact of data breaches, I wonder who wants to start with that one. I mean, I revert to anybody on the panel to start with that one. Probably I go back in the queue of Stephen. You know, probably weighing in on that one. What's your perspective as it relates to the cost of these breaches, albeit social, economic, political, and I don't know if we missed out anything at all in terms of that cost factor. That was not sent on the slide here.
Well, I think it is one of those things, because technology is so ingrained inside a society, it becomes very hard to quantify beyond to say it's extremely critical, and the cost of breaches, or any high errors or risk in this are things which have the potential to set back a group of people, a society, and all that if things get out of hand, or too far out of hand. And the issue here is not simply in terms of it's data stolen and so on, but we're talking about people's ability to trust infrastructure that they rely on, using mobile phones, using computers, conducting business digitally, and so on. And you can just imagine if there is proof, as Trevor just talked about, being able to prove that a breach did occur. But let's say that there's proof that actors are going about stealing stuff, moving stuff around. There's information out there which is damaging to people. That shatters a lot of trust and causes people to kind of think about how we're proceeding in the direction, how we're going down this road with technology. It already exists to some extent, because people, for example, if you look at how people treat with their online information in social media and so on, it's not uncommon to misrepresent yourself on social media just for the purpose of privacy, because it is assumed that on the social platforms, the data is tracked, information about people is shared, is sold, and so on and so forth. So for somebody to maintain some amount of control over their information, they would want to not put everything about themselves or exactly as it is inside of the social platforms. That is people starting to back away from the technology because I'm not sure what is going to happen. Things like GDPR are trying to counterbalance that, but I think a big part of the impact here has to do with how civil society long term looks at technology and embraces and uses technology and so on. Is this going to be something that we can leverage for moving the societies forward, or does it become another fragmented era of life in which people compartmentalize themselves and basically you can't get a good view of what's going on because we just don't trust the platforms as much as we could.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So Lieutenant Sterling, I mean, people could argue that breaches could bring down governments. It could throw economies into tailspins. I'm here wondering, why is it we're not investing in cybersecurity insurance? And probably that needs to be defined for the public here. In other jurisdictions, they are doing that. But when on this impact assessment of breaches, social, economic, and political, and probably put it to you as a starting point to continue the conversation around the table. Why don't we put insurance then in place if we know we're going to have a breach? Because a breach is like, you drive a car and, something happened and you have to go and claim insurance for it. In simple layman's language, don't we need some insurance? Give me your viewpoint on this.
So, Sean, you really hit the nail on the head. And one of the points of our trying to build the capacity of the cybersecurity environment and ecosystem here in Jamaica through the 2021 strategy is just that. However, one has to recognize that the providers or the potential providers of these services must have appetite for the risk involved. The challenge is that a lot of our economic effort is driven by MSMEs, and they, from a management standpoint, have not really embraced the idea that this could happen to them. And so it's more a case of a tandem approach in encouraging the providers of insurance services, similarly to how after some more than 50 years of independence, we finally have insurance for our farmers and fisher folk, to bring that sort of a conversation to the providers of insurance, but also to improve the awareness of the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises that cybersecurity is everybody's business. And as we think about the Data Protection Act, and as we think about the requirements of similar legislation in other jurisdictions for persons who visit our shores and transact business with us, we have to get them on board in such a way that they recognize that it's not just a case of paying into a pot for something that may not happen, but paying into a pot for something when it happens, because it will.
It will
and
happen.
So that socialization of business owners, particularly the micro and small ones, and the encouragement of the service providers is something that we looked at as a critical plank of building the capacity and capability of Jamaica's cybersecurity ecosystem. Now, as far as government, we are investing in cybersecurity. In fact, through the Plan Secure Jamaica cybersecurity aspect of it.
$1 billion to be exact, I may recollect on a news.
Significant investment. However, that investment again will be lost if we really don't have the participation. And so persons who talk about cooperation and about sharing and about not wanting to be burdened onerously with regulations must step up and in a sort of controlled environment share freely where you have data breaches. So that responsible disclosure must be something that become part and parcel of our existence within cyberspace.
Excellent point. I'm going to come to Glenn in a minute here because I want to just put in an interjection based on Lieutenant Sterling's point. I am of the view that in the Caribbean region, we still need digital literacy as it relates to these data breaches and the whole issue of cybersecurity insurance. Because I have consulted with many of our local insurance companies and I sit with the managers and ask them if they know about cybersecurity insurance. And I'm telling you, many of them do not know. And some who do know, they say they don't understand how to even get into that space, much more to really be backing it as a product to the market as it is now to support there. I'm going to leave it open there. I'm going to come back to it because I'm sure where Glenn is, Dr. Dardick is right now in the US, they talk about cybersecurity insurance, but contextualize it for me, Dr. Dardick, in the social, economic, and political impact of breaches. Is cybersecurity insurance enough to deal with these breaches and the issues we're talking about here? What's the view?
No, and I'll give an example. And it's interesting. I have a client that we just went through cyber insurance. And really, you know, one of the things that they do, the insurance companies, is they have a big list of questions for a company when they apply for cyber insurance.
Okay.
And what they're doing is, you know, they're looking at what is the risk. So, you know, you go through the questions with a client, a customer, a company, organization, and if they say, no, we don't do that, no, we don't do that, no, we don't do that, you're going to have very high premiums. If they say, oh, we train everybody, if somebody, messes up, we fire them. Yeah, and you go through the list, do we do an audit? How often do you do an audit? That affects what your premiums are going to be. So there is a correlation there between how much responsibility the organization takes versus how much risk they're shifting off to the insurance company.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think that's where it goes. Can you get insurance for some data breaches? No. And I'm going to talk in two areas, one which we're going through right now in the US, and it really has to do with misinformation as well.
Yes.
So where they're trying to treat it, misinformation as a cybersecurity event. Right now, you may be aware that there's accusations in Arizona that there were data breaches of the election equipment. There is no evidence that there was and so forth, but just the misinformation out there that there might have been a data breach is affecting what people believe. You know, how do you get insurance for something like that? It's not the same thing as the data breaches that we're typically talking about. But when you have state actors, for instance, impacting the sovereignty of another nation, whether it's election equipment and so forth, that's a different type of insurance. How do you prevent something like that? And what does it do to the citizens of a country that thinks that their election systems are not stable or secure?
That feels like we have a whole discussion we could have on that by itself. And the situation puts into context clearly that regardless of where you are, I mean, US being a state where it is more developed with respect to some of these systems, what you're saying, Glenn, is that cyber insurance still is a gray area for administering in the event of economic loss in particular, or any other type of loss as it relates to data breaches. We here in the Caribbean also have a challenge in terms of that bucketive too. Okay, so we're moving around the table, and I want to keep the conversation open. At this point, Stephen, you had waiting, followed by Dr. Campbell in this particular point, or Dr. Campbell rather, in this particular point on social, economic, and political impact of breaches.
Certainly, from a social impact, it has the ability to really make one feel so uncomfortable using internet and e-based technologies, and it can really create a mind block and create a confidence issue for people who really need to be confident in using the technology, and therefore, from that perspective, that impact is a negative impact. From a political point of view, governments are always looked upon to protect people and are expected to make laws and enforce laws. And if they seem not to be able to protect people, people are quick to blame them. But we know that in many cases, although we try to develop software to be as secure as possible, in some cases, common sense could have prevented some of the breaches that we have. So, for example, today with many people working from home and given access to sensitive data, companies must take the necessary precautions to ensure that the data that their employees are using from those home environments are secure.
Thank you for that, Dr. Campbell. Excellent point. So Stephen, no, not Stephen. Trevor, see the hand raised. Stephen just indicated that he had to run, so I would like to thank him for joining in from Caribbean. Very useful input from him and his team there. The floor is yours, Trevor. Please proceed.
Yeah, Prof. So well, the first thing I want to point out, I know of at least 3 local insurance outfits that provide cyber insurance. BCIC, GK, and what's the other one? Gallagher.
Okay.
Right. Now, the extent of their offerings,
yes,
I would say, well, perhaps GK might have a more robust offering because they're partnering with somebody in Europe, I believe. But you can, cyber insurance exists in Jamaica with insurance companies here. So I want to put that out there. As it relates to the bullet point on the social, economic, and political implications of breaches and threats and attacks, Now, that's a huge bullet point right there. I mean, so let's look at it from a social standpoint. If people don't trust the technologies and the systems and the services that, you know, we're trying to get them to use in an effort to make things more efficient or deliver better services, if they don't trust that stuff, they won't use it, and as such, the benefits that can be derived from those services will not be realized. The other thing is, from a social standpoint, the nature of threat activity these days is such that, you know, just to give you an example, when there's a huge cultural aspect that we have to consider when we're talking about one, use of technology in the first instance, but two, trusting the technology.
Yes.
And then layering on top of that what can happen.
Yes.
You know, so what you find is people, and this is a real thing that happens in Jamaica. If you drive past a bank at 8 o'clock in the morning, you see a line outside.
Correct.
And many other people there do that because they do not trust doing transactions online.
That is true.
Not only that, but a lot of them, and this might sound crazy, but a lot of them are of the view that their money is in the bank.
Yes.
No, and again, it's a cultural thing. Some of them go there to say, look, when I came here, I gave my money to somebody.
Yes.
And if something happened to the money, I'm going back to that somebody and I'm going to ask them where my money there.
That's correct.
Right. So there's a trust and accountability factor that goes along with that mentality.
Yes.
In fact, there are people who go to banks to withdraw all of the money so they can see it.
Yes.
And then they put it back in. Because this actually happens. Now, so when you go and you layer on top of that the things that can happen when cyber attacks or cyber threats occur, it erodes the trust, because now they're not dealing directly with a person. They're dealing with a machine.
That's correct.
And if you don't have the right awareness, knowledge, which is why that digital literacy comment is so important.
Right.
If you don't have sufficiently literate or digitally literate citizens, then you're going to find that use of technology is going to be hampered, and we're just going to have a hard time. You have to, really look at the generational shift or change before you see, ubiquitous use of that. So that's social impact. From an economic standpoint, obviously now it is going to, this culture and the trust will impact the kind of things that business, both public and private sector, can do, right? Because we are now competing in a global marketplace. So we don't have the luxury of, sitting down and saying, well, because our people are not inclined to use technology, we're just not going to do it. The rest of the world is moving along, and if we don't seek to keep pace, we will get left behind. And that in itself will cause countries not to want to do business with us, because the technology now has, made the world smaller, and it has given rise to new ways of doing business. And if we can't facilitate that, then countries will not do business with us. And that has a huge impact. So if you look at something like tourism,
yes,
right?
Definitely.
If we, for some strange reason, never adopted, point of sales for card machines and all them something, right? Think of what tourists would think when they hear that, boy, when you go to Jamaica, it's only cash you can use. You can't use credit card.
It would not come.
Yeah. Or think about what would happen if Jamaica decided that, it is not going to boost its internet capabilities or make itself accessible via the internet to the rest of the world.
Yes.
You know, and all of this stuff equates to money that the country would be losing because
right.
now we're not competing with anybody. So now the thing is, if it is that you're talking about financial transactions and so on, if it is that the people who are doing business with these huge financial transactions with do not get the feeling that the environment here is cyber safe,
yes,
then they're going to have reservations about doing business with us.
yes.
Because they want to know that when they're doing transactions with financial institutions here, with people here, with businesses here, that there is sufficient, whether it be infrastructure or laws or anything of that nature, regulations and so on, that will ensure that their transactions and the way they do business is safe.
Definitely.
And if that's not there, they're not doing business with us, right? So, and that will have a huge economic impact.
Huge.
The last one now, and I'm gonna overlap economic and political to a certain degree. Now, the job of a government is to protect its citizens and country and its assets. Citizens being the most important asset, right? And what happens is if you don't sufficiently protect the new citizen, the digital citizen, if you don't protect the infrastructure, the national assets that you have that allow us to exist in the ways described in the two scenarios before, then what you're going to find happening is, again, let's say you don't protect, GPS,
yes.
or you don't protect your internet infrastructure. You don't protect your water infrastructure. These are critical things that we may take for granted, but if they stop working, we have a problem.
Serious problem. Serious problem.
And it's what's happening is, in this day and age, when you're talking about, cyber threats against national assets like GPS,
yes,
I think you have to realize it's really easy when a transformer blow up to point to it and say, yeah, that one that just blew up, go fix that.
Go and fix
it's a completely different situation when an entity like that experiences a cyber attack.
You're so right.
Because oftentimes it is not as simple as pointing to a blown transformer.
That's right.
Right? And repairing it may constitute a more complex and time-consuming undertaking. Now, when you think about what happens when light is gone nationwide for 6 hours, now you put a dollar figure to that.
Right.
It's huge, right?
It's
and
huge.
People will seek to hold the government responsible. And from a political standpoint, and also an economic standpoint, that represents a huge loss. That almost represents dereliction of duty, right?
Definitely.
Because what you're going to find now, and what we have to pay very close attention to, is the fact that wars and invading states don't have to use the traditional approaches anymore. They don't have to use tank and boat and plane and gun and bomb.
Cyber warfare
to bring your economy to its knees.
Yes.
They can do that from their own country, using technology by simply carrying out well orchestrated and sophisticated cyber attacks and cyber warfare. And if you're not sufficiently equipped to defend against those things, you will again see major economic impact. I mean, look at what happened with the Colonial ransomware incident this past week.
Yes.
Look at what that did.
Oh yes,
right?
and still doing.
Yeah. So when you talk about that from a political and who is everybody wanting to blame? Government. because they are the ones who are supposed to protect assets such as those. So the dollar figure impact on each one of those is massive, and it cannot be
treated lightly. It can't be treated lightly.
Cannot be at all. So that is something that we really need to pay very close attention to, because the investment, I mean, I understand that, we have our limitations, and we've earmarked $1 billion for cyber security and defense investment, but that's not nearly enough.
Definitely. So it's a very strong argument you have made.
Because I can tell you, a single attack could cause us to lose more than that.
No, I don't even want to say it in this podcast. I'd rather reserve my comments. It is so huge. It is so huge an impact that the critical infrastructure protection you just mentioned is a very, very important concern. So thank you for that input. Thank you for that input, Trevor. I want to recognize the only lady on the call this afternoon, Mrs. Erica Simmons. Thank you for joining from Caribbean Maritime, and also member of the Jamaica Computer Society. I did see her. Welcome. We're keeping a podcast session here on cybersecurity data breaches, and a very riveting conversation indeed on this point. So I'm going to put this back to Dr. Dardick. Based on what Trevor just said, with the crude pipelines incident in the last week, that represents an attack on the critical infrastructure protection environments for the US. I mean, if you can bring down one pipeline and to the point that people have to be, getting gas in pans and so on, or can't get any gas for days at a time. The implications of if this was to scale, what would happen in the US? I don't know if you can comment on that, Glenn. I'm sure we here in the Caribbean have a serious situation to think about in light of what we have seen happening in this last week.
Well, you said what would happen in the US? I mean, in addition to what has already happened, or?
Yes. So, I mean, you had one attack here, and I think there's some effort to restore, but it doesn't negate the fact that it could happen again, and the scale of it could increase. It means the critical infrastructure is at risk in more ways than we think. I mean, somebody could say, how did the US get there? And they would have spent so much effort and time building out their cybersecurity infrastructure, or so we would think. But do you see this being an impact to the US as a larger state compared to Caribbean state?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting. A number of years ago, and I still do it, I have students in one of my classes watch something called Cyber Shockwave. It was broadcast on CNN. It has a large number of public figures that are involved, and it just goes through, what would a cyber event look like? And it was like something like 10 years old. And when you watch it, at the end, you basically, say, we're really screwed. These people at the highest echelons of government really don't know how to handle the situation. And one of the things it dealt with was, how do you handle a data breach that comes out of another country that may be actually originating in a third country, which in a case with the recent breach, they're saying that was the organization out of Russia, but they were using the systems out of Iran, and the person that may have been working with the organization, who knows where they were. Well, that was 10 years ago, and you watch it today and you see that we are no better off than we were 10 years ago. Meaning we've tried to improve our cybersecurity aspect or defense of our infrastructure over that time, but we've had lots of false steps. I think the President Biden recently has implemented some more executive orders. Hopefully this is a wake-up call. But it's kind of like when we talked earlier about, how long has data breaches been going on? How long is, our political ineptitude of dealing with it been going on? And it's been a lot longer than it should. So again, it gets back to what I was saying before. It's not just the technical talent, it's the management talent or the political talent, if you would. We need less political and more statesmanship or more government capability, not just political. We use the term political, and unfortunately in the US these days, political has become something a little bit different than what it should be.
Okay.
But government responsibility needs to really get to a higher level. It really does.
Okay, so and that has its own merit of discussion. So you have shifted us now into the realm of the talent argument in a more serious way, because where I know China says they boast a cybersecurity army of over 1 million to manage their critical infrastructure. I don't think we want to make that kind of comparison in our island states here. Or I'm not even sure if in the US or Canada or in the EU that is happening. But how significant, I'm throwing this around the table, and Erica, you may have some views you may want to share as well in this if you would like. How significant is the availability or the lack thereof of the talent in the market that impacts the type of breaches, or actually impact the fact that we face breaches? Or is there any correlation at all to the fact that you can have breaches because of the lack thereof of talent, or even the availability of the talent? So let's throw this out. If Erica, you could join in, and I probably ask Dr. Campbell, and then I go back around the table in that fashion. I welcome your views, and thank you for coming. She doesn't have a mic. All right, so Dr. Campbell, the floor is yours.
Well, what more can I contribute?
well, it's but the talent pool.
In terms of the talent pool, yes, definitely. As we look,
go ahead.
Yeah, as we look at the challenges that we face, we will definitely need the talent to be able to respond. We may not be able to fight wars, but at least to protect our critical infrastructure, for us to survive and exist in this digital age. And therefore, what it calls for in terms of preparing our citizens, our students, for careers in cyber security and data analytics, etc., because those two are converging rapidly. It calls for a different mindset, in my view, a different mindset where the very thought of how we think about systems need to change. That it's all integrated into, for want of a better word, ecosystem of that consists of so many different parts, moving parts. And the talents that we need, it's not only going to be science-based, but it's also going to be from the other disciplines coming together to formulate the kind of approaches, policies, frameworks in order to respond to these challenges. Because even the way how these attacks originate and behave may not be defined strictly in a logical way, but may rest in our understanding of how humans behave, what motivates them to do what they do. So it is a major challenge. I don't know if I have the answers for that.
Fair enough. fair enough, fair enough. And we have to respect that, because not everything all the answers present themselves in one go. So I to this point that you just make though, is that universities and colleges together have to keep making a concerted and deliberate effort to train a talent pool to provide to the market, to support the cybersecurity infrastructure for small and medium-sized enterprise, general, larger enterprises, and just for a general public. We need talented people who can, in fact, understand the concerns and treat with them. So at UTech, we have trained on average over 200 undergrads in a core course in computer security. We now offer degrees to the point that security is in its own right, a specialized area, and cybersecurity being one such. But is it reasonable to say that if we put out 200 undergraduates from a program of study, or 300, we'd ever have enough? So I thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, for that point. But probably I should ask Lieutenant Sterling, who is probably seeing the gaps and seeing the need and the need for talent, probably may have a holistic view on this that he could share.
Right. So the challenge we face, Prof, is going to be one of creating a hybrid pool to start off with, while we seek to get to those sort of standardized qualifications and certifications that exist out there. And the reason I put it that way is that currently you have practitioners without formal certification who hold their own realistically within the cyber ecosystem. And while we seek to create that formal educational bridge that provides those persons who are certified to international standards, if we totally ignore that pool of persons who are currently in the breach and dealing with what we have to treat with, then what we're going to end up with is a gap that we can't necessarily bridge. And so the efforts of the universities, particularly UTech and UWI, it's really appreciated. But also what needs to happen is a buy-in from management that seeks to empower and upskill the existing pool of talent within information systems technologies within their organizations to take them from IT security to cyber security. By so doing, the pool of people who are really practicing cyber hygiene will increase, and the level of vulnerability of the organizations will proportionally decrease. We have to accept that in an economic sector where you have more than 2 million jobs where we can't fill them, people are going to gravitate towards the more lucrative paydays. And so job retention is also going to be something that management has to critically look at once they get these persons. So it's not just a case of being a feeder for more lucrative societies, but how do you bridge the gap where your talent pool feels a sense of pride in remaining, not just because of remuneration, but also because of a recognition of the role they play in securing the environment. And so that hybrid model going forward, at least in the short to medium term, is something that both management and academia must buy into. And, even credits for work done, credits for hours spent at work doing this sort of thing would help some of the existing practitioners to more easily upskill and be better able to counter the threat.
Excellent, excellent point. So deep, riveting points there about how management. I'm trying to figure out how you get management to see that. I mean, is it that in light of these breaches as we are seeing them, they should not be seeing it already, that this is something that should not be understated in any way, should be treated with urgency? I'm not sure. Probably.
Part of it is really the practitioners recognizing that, the ICT cyber information system security, it's no one melting pot where persons must take this to the boardroom. And so even if it's an elevator pitch, if it's going through somebody who is not necessarily in your direct chain of command, but getting the message to the boardroom so that they understand and appreciate, one, the complexity of the environment, the dynamic nature of it, and two, the options available to them for securing their environment as best as can be secured, understanding that vulnerabilities will exist and must be mitigated at some point. And then once that conversation starts, you'll find that the board now begins to understand some of the challenges down in that dark room that maintains the computer systems that they love to use. And it becomes more of a budget item than just bar talk.
Yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. So the technology talent is really an ongoing conversation. Is there a view you have from where you sit, Trevor? And well, I heard Glenn's view already in a sense about the talent. But is there a specific view you have, Trevor, on the talent itself?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, you know, my take and efforts on that one, but let me first say I agree with what Lieutenant Colonel Sterling has put forward. I'd also want to add that look, the job market globally,
yes,
right? I think at
2.3 trillion. I understand. Can correct me if I'm wrong, but 2.3.
Well, no, I'm just saying for cybersecurity professionals, over 3.5 or 4 million unfilled jobs, right?
Yes,
and for us to feel that we could fill the demand here, we can't do it. That's more than our population, right? But something that we also need to pay attention to, which some of our policymakers need to come to grips with. In this space, gone are the days when people are leaving Jamaica to go somewhere else to do that work.
Yes.
Right? Because what is happening is they don't need to leave here.
Yes.
So you may be training the pool, and they're right here doing the work for somebody else, right? No, you have to acknowledge and realize this, because there are some opportunities you have in that, right? Which I'll touch on in a little bit. Now, the goal, as you know, Sean, behind in 2017, there was a proposal to create a cyber academy in Jamaica.
Correct.
The goal of that initiative was to create a sustainable pool of trained and certified professionals with a pipeline both directly from high school or from university. Because again, the reality is this: many of the profiles of the people that you want working in this space, a university degree may not be for them initially, but you still need to take advantage of that. So you have to create an environment where you can generate the resources, create that pool that we need from as many sources as possible. So some coming straight out of high school can, be trained and become useful resources. You have, higher education, tertiary institutions, again, that may feed into that space. And once you do that, what you want to do, even if you matriculate in, let's just say for argument's sake, 500 a year, you're always doing 500 a year. And you may find that 10% of those may seek employment here, because them don't want to leave here. You might get even higher numbers. But the idea is that we need to seriously look at how we, invest in creating the pool. Right now, the only way that those things typically happen is if you start to, if at the highest level you start to contemplate policies that say, okay, we are going to invest in these disciplines. You know, we talk a lot about STEM, which is great. But we also need to look at specialized skill sets and say, look, we're going to invest in these. This is a national imperative. And, you know, we are going to cause Jamaica to be good at, you know, these disciplines. So if cybersecurity is one, which is a fast growing one, we say, look, we're going to do that, and we invest in it, and we equip the resources. And in doing so, we have our pool, we have a local cadre of people who can work in the local space, and if they so desire, they can go abroad. Right? The fear shouldn't be, oh, you train them and them leave. What we need to be looking at is how we keep the pool constantly supplied.
Yes.
Right? I think Lieutenant Sturley made an excellent point when he said, look, if you educate the people, increase the literacy, then the threats go down. Right? Because it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because if you have more educated people, then they will treat with a lot of what is happening out there better. So you find that some of the things that typically happen, the threats that occur, the vulnerabilities that are found and turned into incidents and breaches, those go down, because the biggest issue that we have is not from the external people, it's from the internal ones. And if you make them aware, you find that our risk profile may go down, and you know, we might be in a better situation. So it's a multi-pronged approach: awareness, capacity building, and all of this should sound familiar because it's in the pillars of the cybersecurity strategy for the national cybersecurity strategy, right? And if we can seriously look at doing that kind of stuff, you'll have people who can get meaningful employment. You'll have enough people in a pool to supply local, you know, entities and a local ecosystem with qualified people. And you might very well find a reduction in some of the, you know, day-to-day issues that we have because of lack of awareness. So I think that's how we kind of need to look at, you know, the value of the pool and creating the pool. Don't feel that you have to have people coming out of university with a degree to fill the pool. No, you have people who are perfectly capable, very astute, who are coming out of high school, and you can tap into that. And invariably what you might find is after they get the certification, doing some works in some places, then they go back to university, right? So we need to look at multiple sources in a pipeline to boost the capacity and the resources in the cyber security space. Don't just rely on what is coming out of university. And if you take that approach, you need a specialized institution geared at bolstering that pool.
Excellent point. And this is a deep, riveting conversation. It's an excellent point on where the talent pool and that broadened perspective of how we engage the talent pool and keep the pipeline coming, as you rightfully say, is necessary to steer the conversation. I think the same thing will be happening in the US. Glenn, I mean, is that how you view the talent pool economics from where your space is right now?
I'm not sure how to respond. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the wider US. I know Emerald, you produce graduates as well in cybersecurity, and there are other institutions that do. But is there a talent pool issue there?
Hold
hold on a second. Hold on a second there. Sean, did you just say Embry-Riddle?
Yes, he's our good friend, Professor Kessler's colleague, and he's actually here with me at well, he's doing my virtual lab solution at UTech.
So you know I'm an Embry-Riddle alumni.
I know he had to get that one in. Yes, I remember that because you and I and Professor Kessler had that conversation before.
Okay. Just have to put you just have to big up the Eagles as we are on the call.
Yes. So in the case of Trevor Glenn, he met with Gary when he visited last Jamaica. So we had some good conversations about Emory. So good introduction point there. But yes, how does it pan out?
I might want to add, as long as we're talking, well, I might want to add that Gary has now left, retired from Embry-Riddle.
I know.
And is actually focused on working with various institutions on marine cybersecurity.
Yes, he told me.
So I did note that I believe Erica Simmons is associated with CMU. Is that correct?
That's right, the Caribbean Maritime University. Yes,
I'll throw that out there just in case that's of interest. But he's been working on cybersecurity now on with the Coast Guard here and so forth.
Yes, he has a book out on that as well. I saw the book. I actually read the book. Excellent. Yes, excellent point there. Right. So from where you sit, is the talent pool dynamics just based on how Lieutenant Sterling and how Trevor explained it, a cause for concern in the U.S.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're actually doing in Embry-Riddle was trying to, before I was mentioning the management aspect, we're actually located not in engineering, but in the College of Arts and Sciences, dealing with the Homeland Security folks. Gary's emphasis, my emphasis as well, was that we needed to get those people in Homeland Security familiar with cybersecurity. Getting back to what I was mentioning earlier, we have a big gap between those in responsibility and understanding what the people in technology are trying to tell them. So there's two gaps here. One is filling the technical positions, but the other is getting those people that are responsible for the management of cybersecurity up to speed on what cybersecurity means from a policy and management standpoint. So really big gaps in both areas.
Excellent. Okay, so and so therefore there's commonality across the board where this is concerned. So well, I guess that says enough for talent, and if that is the fact that we still have to keep replenishing talent, it means in light of these data breaches that we are now seeing then, what are we suggesting then in terms of mitigation strategies? I mean, I assume there should be heavy breach investigations going on in terms of collecting data and aggregating that data and coming up with points to determine when in the first place that they were a breach as opposed to it being a vulnerability, as Trevor alluded to. Because if you don't have all the facts, you can't really prove that it's a breach. But is it reasonable to say that the mitigation strategies for handling breach are sufficient? And I say that against two counts. The turnaround time sometimes to do these things is not trivial, and I'm not sure if time is a luxury that we have. But I'm opening it back to the floor. Lieutenant Sterling, probably I'll ask you for us to weigh in and then move back around the table. Is the mitigation and efforts with mitigation significant at this time?
I think he dropped.
Oh, he dropped. May have dropped. Okay. All right, Trevor. Well, between, or probably I'll ask Glenn to weigh in on that, and then probably yourself, Sir Campbell, and then Trevor. Glenn, is mitigation enough? Is the mitigation that is going on in the US now enough? Do you think it's acceptable? What's going on?
From personal experience, no. And we I think discussed this before, is that I think forensic readiness, I think is an important factor. I think to mitigate the effects of breaches, we need to understand what forensic readiness means. I don't think we're prepared for breaches. You know, it's been said during this podcast as well that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So assuming that it's a question of when, you should be prepared. That's the only way to mitigate. I think, you know, we talked about insurance. Insurance isn't mitigation per se. It's really shifting risk. So you may be mitigating the effect on an organization. Well, we're not going to have to pay if, you know, something happens bad. Well, you know, that's kind of a mitigation, but really the mitigation we need to see is making the damage from a breach minimal. So we can teach, you know, should you have backups? Should you have everything updated? That sort of thing. But really part of it is going to be forensic readiness, being able to have the information available to and analyze, you know, how did the breach occur? You know, it's pretty hard to, you know, if it's social engineering, you know, then fine. How do you deal with it? If it has to do with, it didn't occur last week, it occurred a year ago, we just didn't know it. You know, how do you mitigate the possibility of having breaches? So it's not just the mitigation of the effect of the breach, it's mitigating the possibility of a breach, I guess.
A reasonable point. So in mitigation strategies have to be tied with the fact that risk and risk transfers are realities that you have to deal with in the market space. And I think there's no silver bullet response to this. Trevor, any points on this? And I'll then ask Dr. Campbell to weigh in as we soon be wrapping this up. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're looking at this from and you have to look at it from the standpoint of risk, right? Because, you know, when you're looking at how and what you have to invest to prevent, you know, and to deal with what can come your way, a clear understanding of what it will cost you or the cost of doing nothing is very important, right? So it is important because obviously it is not the cyber security practitioner that's going to cut the check, right? So the first aspect of mitigation, I feel, is for the practitioner to be able to understand business imperatives and then understand how to make the case for the decision maker. Because what we tend to find is a lot of this stuff already makes sense to us. I mean, we live it. We have to deal with it, whether it is in a reactive way or other way. But so it makes sense to us why you need to do something. But the bean counters don't necessarily understand. And if we can't make a sensible case, business case, then we're not going to get the investment from them to do the mitigation, right? So that's the first challenge that we need to overcome. The next thing is, and that's why you find that a lot of major entities have not invested sufficiently in protecting themselves, because they don't understand it and nobody has properly explained it to them, right? So I think that is a very critical aspect of the mitigation strategy and protecting yourself. You need to correlate that to how it will impact the business and what it will cost
if you don't do anything, right? Once you're able to do that, then the ability to create an appropriate strategy then kicks in, and you go from there. But in my view, I think one of the biggest challenges to overcome is being able to make the business case for the investment in mitigation, right? Because already we all know that we have to do it. It's just the people who are talking to don't get it. And if we can't make it make sense for them, it won't happen. So if there's any focus that we need to have is on being able to make the case. Because that is how, I mean, ultimately the things get done. That is how you will get your funding and your budget and all of that stuff to protect things.
I could play devil's advocate. It won't change, but devil's advocate, playing devil's advocate, you know, the activities are already happening that should influence that thought. But as you correctly say, you have to influence the business people.
Yeah, so the activities are happening, you know, but you know, if you're making $1 billion a year, you feel good until somebody come and tell you you're losing $500 million.
You're right, that's right.
Right? Now, how do you tell a guy who is making $1 billion that you're losing $500 million? You have to make a case, and you have to come with information and demonstrate where he's losing it. And I mean, I personally have had that challenge over years where you're trying to demonstrate losses about things people can't see.
Right.
So you can have cyber attacks going on and you're losing money and you don't know.
Yes.
And you attribute it to something else. But until I can show you, and until you are willing to see that proof. And I mean, it's just like with IT. You know, technology and IT systems do so much for businesses, but and even today, but for many years, what IT did and has done for many businesses and their success has never been recognized in that way, because us practitioners never made a business case. So it is passed off as something else. But I tell you this, take out all of the computer, them out of the company and say, wow.
Exactly.
Right? So and something as simple as that may not, we take it for granted, but it does not play into, you know, the justification for spend. And if we are not making the justification clear as it relates to the business imperatives and goals, it's not going to be understood, and we're not going to get to where we need to get to. You know, so even though the things are happening, some businesses say, well, when it happens, we deal with it at that time.
Yes,
not realizing that
yes.
that what I'm asking you to spend to mitigate that is way less than what it would cost you when it happens. Not if it happens, it is going to happen. Right? But how do you have to understand how to make that sell? Because you are trying to sell people and something them can't see, much less understand.
That is true.
That is the biggest challenge that we have to overcome and get really good at, because if we don't do that, you know, we're going to run into these problems. You know, and this is on us, the practitioners, to understand how to make that business case.
Okay, excellent, a very excellent point. Very excellent point indeed.
With that, I have to jump off, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for joining. And I'm really at the last point of the conversation. I don't know if Dr. Campbell had anything further to say on that point, because the last point of the meeting this evening is what's next. I mean,
well, what I have to say is that, you know, every organization today, it's an imperative that the organization understands its risk profile, and know that they act of just participating in business carries its own set of risk. And as we operate in a cyber environment, understanding one's risk profile is critical from my point of view. So risk management is an important part of that strategy for mitigation. So one should be able to forecast the kind of risk that the company is likely to face. One should be able to anticipate the kind of risk and its impact. So they should be doing some kind of ranking of these kind of risk and possible scenarios if this risk was to be realized in the organization, and in so doing, make that a part of the budgeting exercise when they do go after their various business strategies for growth and development. They should factor for cyber risk as well into it. So they're never going to be surprised by any possible outcome, and they would be better prepared because they would have a plan. They would be able to rehearse possible scenarios and see how this organization would respond. You know, the equivalent of doing fire drills then, I would say, in terms of these cyber practices, to see what would we be able to do. So one in the thought of a strategic thinker, basically force the organization to fail in order to learn from it, would be one of the ways to mitigate against the effects of these kind of cyber risk. Okay, that's my contribution.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. So risk profiling is very necessary to also make the business case that I heard Trevor mention, because the business case can't be qualified without supporting that risk profile. Excellent points indeed. It's not just an academic context here, it's also an applied context for which we in the community, especially in the academic community, have to pay more attention to. And the elucidate of the business cases and carrying some of these. As a matter of fact, we are writing a few business cases now, right, as the University of Technology Jamaica through the School of Computing that delivers on these points. And you know, so what is important then is the need to sort of pay attention to these concerns in a meaningful way. There is a lot of opportunity amidst the challenges for making the business cases and for in advising companies to invest, albeit small or medium-sized to large companies, to really look at their cybersecurity investments, look at the insurance that they're putting in place as a good measure for that. We in Jamaica here tend to tell practitioners that, you know, 30% of the budget should really be set aside for indemnity for the cybersecurity office or officers, or the chief security officer in an organization should really have that allocation on budget. How much it is really practiced, it varies from organization to organization, and some may not have that type of investment put down to deal with mitigation. I'm equally true, I figured in the US they have similar concerns, although they have cyber insurance, but the concerns are in fact general, because the cost of security many a times far outweigh the risk, and sometimes the risk far more than what the cost may be. So these are very interesting times. and it's a very interesting conversation. And the next steps is where I'm at. I wanted to just now put that around the table. I'll probably start with Glenn. What you, in the grand scheme of things and what we have discussed this evening, what you see as a potential set of next steps? If you had the remit, you know, as government or as or as an entity who could make a change or influence on this, what would be your next steps and what?
Well, I think it's been hit upon, and I think education, not just for the technical talent pool, but I think education at the corporate level, at the small to medium business level. I think we need to have more seminars, education, rather, whatever, to the management team, the owners of businesses and organizations, so they understand what their responsibilities are. Not just, you know, and as it was mentioned, it's not just a good idea to, you know, tell them, you know, it's important. You need to show them, you know, there's an economic reason. You know, what are the odds that something will happen? What are the, you know, the risks? What is the potential financial outlay? In the U.S., we have something called Hand's rule, after Judge Learned Hand, which talks about how much money or effort someone should put into preventing accidents or events. So, you know, this is just part of risk analysis. But I think we need to educate, you know, whether it's through a small business administration or government entities of some sort. We need to not just tell our students they need to be educated. We need to deal with business managers as well.
So in that context then, Glenn, is the universities involved in cybersecurity education, just like regular training institutions? Just a case in point.
They are, and it's important, but I don't see the outreach from universities. I think the universities should have outreach to the community. I think they should use their folks that are teaching cybersecurity management and policy and work with, you know, whether it's the Rotary Club or Small Business Administration or any kind of government, you know, when they have a meeting, offer speakers up. Tell the people, you know, what's important in terms of defending against cyber attacks. I know that NIST has done that in the U.S. or is trying to do that. The Better Business Bureau has tried to do it. I don't know where they stand right now, but I think universities can play a very important role in that outreach effort.
I agree. I fully agree. Excellent point. So cybersecurity education definitely is a very valuable next step. And we here at UTech actually will keep the Holy Grail on that as it relates to driving that initiative. Good point. Dr. Campbell, you have the last word.
Okay, what next? Breaches will always be a reality. Cyber security and readiness is what we have to live with. It's like saying that we will have to live with COVID for the foreseeable future. So we have to treat it as such, as part of what we do, the hazards. So each day we learn as we live our lives in this digital space, that these are situations that we have to prepare for. And so we will always be required and be called upon to train a cadre of skilled individuals to be able to help organizations to avoid these the damaging outcomes that could result from these breaches. And so as academics, we are tasked with that responsibility. in terms of our practice and our involvement with organizations, I would say that with every difficulty, every situation that is a challenge, it also offers opportunities, and there are opportunities for solving these problems, and we should seek to build partnership cases through research and consultancies with these organizations. So as we learn, we can apply and we can develop the kind of knowledge base and expertise so that these organizations will always feel that the first point of contact when they need support is to come to the academic institution, because therein reside this wealth of talent to respond to their needs. And so for the way forward, I say there are always going to be challenges, but we must have the right mindset, be prepared to challenge the impossibilities.
Excellent way to wrap on this very powerful session today, riveting conversation on the whole space of cybersecurity breaches, and in particular, with the recent declared breach of the colonial ransomware attack in the US, and our own perceptions of breaches locally, perceived or real as they may be. We are living in a time where this is an increased activity, where bad actors will continue to be pervasive in the space. We here at UTech strongly believe in cybersecurity education, and this particular podcast is a testimony to that intent to keep information real time on very salient conversations for the public. We will be continuing our cybersecurity education series in this regard, as well as to provide for both government and private sector entities viable use cases as a part of a digital literacy campaign. So I really want to thank all the presenters today for the courtesies of their time, and for those of us who joined in and listened, and for all of us who are in podcast land, who will be picking this up. Kindly leave your comments at the end of the post for today, third in our series of the Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership. It was a wonderful evening, and here in curfew time in Jamaica during the pandemic is a productive way to spend an evening. I would like to thank you all, and you have a wonderful Sunday, May 16, 2021. All right, so thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thanks, Sherwin, for joining in from your vacation. Hope this was informative for you. And thank you, Erica, for listening in remotely. I will reach out to some of you afterwards on some possibilities and the next step. So have a wonderful evening, and I'm going to end my recorded session.